Baruch Hashem, today's Daf Yomi is Sanhedrin Daf Tes, and today's Daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Atzal for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. Today's Daf Yomi, we saw yesterday 5 explanations as to how do we explain the dispute between Rameir and the Rabbanan in the opening mission of Sanhedrin. Rameir said, and if it's a case of Motzi Shemra is where the husband claims, my bride was not a virgin on the wedding night, therefore I don't have to pay her the virgin price for a ksuba. And so therefore he brings her father to court. He wants to pay less money. So Rabbi Meir says that's judgment in front of a court of 3, and the Rabbanan said it's judged in the court of 23 because it's a case of Dina Nefashos. Gemara says, but what do we care if it's a case of Dina Nefashos? When it becomes a case of capital case, then we'll make it 23. In the meantime, it's not. So the Gemara yesterday gave 5 answers, and today the Gemara is going to give several more. This is even though this is already on Daf Tes of the, even though there's already Daf Tes of the tractate, but this is what's called a haskalah. This is the beginning of the tractate because it's a survey of many of the Mishnayot in the tractate. And we know that usually a lot of the opening chapters of the tractate, of the opening sugyos of the tractate, are haskalos. They're like surveys. Imagine a professor of law coming in and giving an opening survey at the beginning, introducing us to the tractate. And so some of these answers to answer this question are really surveys of the entire tractate. So we're now up to the 6th answer. Ravina says, what are we talking about here? If we go into one of the witnesses to this matter was found to be disqualified, a relative or disqualified. The kamiflagi bepukta de Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbi Aliba de Rabbi Akiva. And this is actually the dispute between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi according to the position of Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva said, meaning to say the pasuk says al pishnayim edim or al pishlosh edim yumas amaze. The pasuk says in Devarim chapter 17, on the basis of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, the person will be executed, put to death. So if you have 2 witnesses that are enough to sentence a man to death, why do you need 3 witnesses? So Rabbi Akiva says that the third witness is, hey Kobe, we have the Gemaras over here. Rabbi Akiva says that the third witness is only coming to be strict. That the reason why it says the third witness is to be strict upon him, meaning to say that he has the same law as the first 2, that if the first 2 are punished, even though the third one is not necessary, the third one is also going to be punished. If the third one testified falsely, even though he's not necessary, he's also going to be punished. So, imkain anash hakasav asanit po over avera. If the Torah is going to punish somebody who is just an accessory to a sin, as though they did this in themselves, alachas kama kama sheyishalim scharas anitapel ose mitzvah kose mitzvah. How much more so will the Torah give reward to the person who's just adjunct to a mitzvah, who's just an adjunct to a mitzvah? Because we know, says Rashi, that the midah tova is greater than the midah peronios, that the attribute for good is greater than the attribute for bad. So therefore, Gemara says, Umash Naim, Nimtza Echamein Karvu Pasal. And just like 2, if you have one of them found to be disqualified, also 3, if you have one of them that's found to be disqualified, it's disqualified. So basically, according to this position of Tanakama, is let's say you have 3 witnesses and one of them is found to be disqualified, then all 3 witnesses are disqualified, even though the third witness is not even necessary. We don't even need the third witness. You only need 2 witnesses. But let's say the third witness is a gambler or is the person's brother, then the other 2 are also disqualified. So I'm a Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yossi says, when do we say this? Only by a capital case. So B'dinei Mamanos, this guy must aid this Bashar. But by Dinei Mamanos, by a monetary case, you're going to establish it with the other two witnesses. So Rabbi Yossi says, by a monetary case, if the third witness is a disqualified, it doesn't disqualify the first two. But by a capital case, it does. But Rabbi Omer, both by a monetary case and a capital case, the third witness disqualifies it. But that's only where they gave them the warning, where the relative gave the warning that he's telling them that we are witnesses. And so therefore, if they didn't give the warning, if they didn't give the warning, then what does it matter? How else can, like, let's say a guy, Rahman al kills somebody in front of 100 people, and one of them is a relative, then all of a sudden he can't be tried. It doesn't make any sense. So it's only where the relative is the one who gave the warning. So anyway, this is the dispute. This is the dispute between Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan in our Mishnah. The Ravina is saying that we're talking about a circumstance that the third witness is disqualified. The third witness who saw that she was adulterous was disqualified, and he didn't give the warning. Rabbi Meir says that he's going to combine to disqualify them, and so therefore it's not a capital case, it's a monetary case, and so therefore it's enough with 3. Whereas Rabbanan say that he does not combine to disqualify them, and so therefore we're going to view it as a case of 23. That's the 6th scenario. So we're going to have 2 more scenarios about how you can explain our Mishnah. Ibaya Sema, scenario number 7, can go in Shahasru Ba'acherim or Hasru Ba'edim. So that what happened here was that other people warned this woman not to be adulterous, but the witnesses themselves did not warn them. The Kamifla gave a pukta to Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan, and this is the dispute between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan. The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says, "La'olam eino nerag achiu pi shnei edav ma'asrim bo." Rabbi Yossi says the person is only killed if the witnesses themselves are the ones that warn him. But if other people warn him and not the witnesses, he's not killed, because it says al pi shnayim edim. Whereas the Rabbanan are of the position that the witnesses themselves don't need to warn him. And so that's a dispute. We're talking about a case where the witnesses did not warn him. Did not warn them. Other people warned this person. So Rabbi Meir says it's a case of monetary claim then. It's only 3. And since the other witnesses warned her, and Rabbanan say it's a case of a capital case, even though the witnesses didn't warn her. So now we come up to the 8th scenario. In the 8th scenario, we just have to take a step back and say that the Torah talks about you have to cross-examine the witnesses. And this cross-examining of the witnesses by the court, it's not by the other attorney. There's no attorneys in the Talmud. Talmud is very, very anti-attorneys, actually. Very anti. It's not acceptable in a Bezdin. The 2 parties come, and the court acts as decides the truth. But the court has to do a cross-examination, and this is called the darashta v'chakarta v'sha'alta. You do a drisha and a chakira. You investigate them. So the judges have to ask a chakira. They have to ask the 7 basic questions. What are the 7 basic questions? What year of the Jubilee? What year of the sabbatical year? What month? What day of the month? What day of the week? What time of day? And what place? These are 7 basic questions. And then they also have to ask drishas, meaning to say, what was he wearing? Like these are questions that you don't necessarily always pay attention to. So if the witnesses contradict on the chakiros, or they say they don't know, then the testimony is going to be canceled. But by a bedika, if they say they don't know, it's going to be still a valid testimony. But if they contradict each other, the Gemara in the 3rd parak is going to have a discussion about that. Yeah, you had a question, Harold?
Yes.
They were just talking theoretically. They wouldn't ask that question now. Nowadays, they might. Well, they were imagining. They're imagining. So now they might ask, "Who's the president?" What that might say. What's the like the basic questions that they ask you after a concussion? Who's the president? Where, what's your name? What's your birthday? So Gemara says, so that's what we're talking about here, where they had contradiction on these questions which are not essential, but they didn't contradict in the chakiros on the essential questions. Ben Zakkai v'Rabbanan. And this is a dispute between Ben Zakkai and the Rabbanan later on in our Masechta, again in chapter 3. There was an incident when Ben Zakkai asked, "Tell me the thickness of the stems of the figs," and they contradicted each other, and he disqualified their testimony. So that Rabbi Meir holds like Ben Zakkai. So, by the way, this is Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, but he was not yet a rabbi then. He was still a student, and so they just called him Ben Zakkai. So, Rabbi Meir holds like Ben Zakkai that if they contradict on these unessential questions, it's going to be a monetary case, not a capital case. Whereas the Chamim say that since by the Chakiros, their testimony was in line with each other, it's a valid testimony. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef, Hevi Abal Edim Shezinta Vevi Av Edim Vizimim Eidi Abal Eidi Abal Neragim Ve'Mishalma Mammon. Okay, we're basically, this is also part of our survey. Again, we have this person who libeled, this person, what's the Motzi Shemer claim? He says she was adulterous, and therefore I don't want to pay her ksuba for a virgin, and also she should be put to death because she was adulterous, because there was a betrothal. During that period of engagement, she's like married to him. Even though they're not living together, she's not allowed to be with another man. So if the husband brings witnesses that she was adulterous while she was betrothed, and then the father brings witnesses and he impeaches the witnesses of the husband, and the witnesses of the husband are killed because they were impeached and they were trying to put the woman, yes. I mean, I'm sure it happened. I don't know how common it was. Right. I mean, theoretically, you assume that they were discussing some cases that actually happened. But the Talmud is not opposed to bringing up scenarios that don't happen and discussing them. So we don't know how often. What? Yeah, just in case they do happen. So I don't know how often it happens. So so if the husband brought witnesses that she was adulterous, and then the father brought witnesses and impeached the husband's witnesses. Now, if your witnesses were impeached, then the law is that what happens to them is what they tried to do. So since they tried to kill her, therefore these witnesses are put to death. They also tried to cause her to lose her ksuba, but they don't have to pay the money for that. Why? Because we have a principle, and when you're punished, you get only the more severe penalty. That's called kimle b'derabminei. We discussed that in Ksuvos, in the second chapter of Ksuvos. So since they're killed, yeah, we're about to do that right now. So then it says, so that's kimle b'derabminei. So they only get the more severe penalty. They're put to death, but they don't pay money. Now let's say the husband comes along and impeaches the father's witnesses who had impeached his witnesses. So there's two other witnesses who impeached the father's witnesses. Then and then the witnesses of the father are killed because they tried to have the witnesses of the husband killed, so they're the ones who are killed. And they also have to pay the money. Why? Mammon was there, nefashos was there, because they tried to cause the husband to lose the money. Since they were causing the husband to lose the money, therefore, it's two different people. We're trying to cause the witnesses to die and the husband to lose the money. So it's two different acts on two different parties. And so therefore, Rav Yosef's of the position that they're going to get two punishments. So that's the position of Rav Yosef, that we don't say Kimle B'Daramine where it's going on two different people. Yeah. No, women are not, generally speaking. Women are, generally speaking, not able to be witnesses. There are some areas where we believe a woman, like on matters of Isser v'Heter, whether or not something was permitted or prohibited. But generally speaking, women cannot be witnesses in the Beis Din. Yeah. Muhammad Rav Yosef. Okay, now we have a very interesting scenario. Rav Yosef, Ploni Revo Onso, a person who comes to the court and he says, this person, this man sexually assaulted me. So a man comes and he says, this other man sexually assaulted me. Now the punishment for male sexuality is death, and so therefore he says, this man assaulted me. So therefore but I was against my will, so I'm not punishable by death, but he's going to be punishable by death. Shehu va'achar mitzdarfin lahargo. So now this person who says it happened, he's allowed to be a witness with somebody else to combine to execute this man who did this act. He could testify against it. But if he says l'rtzono, if he said, listen, I did it willingly with this other man, then he's no longer believed to testify about him with somebody else. Meaning to say, Reuben says, I had the male intercourse with Shimon, and now Reuben can't testify with Levi to the act, since Reuben did it willingly. Why? Because he's a rasha, because he's a sinner. He willingly did it. By Torah Amra, the Torah says, Al Tashas Rasha Aid. The Torah says a wicked person cannot combine to be a witness. And so therefore he's disqualified, and so therefore we don't believe him. What? You're about to see. Rabba says no. Rabba says he can still testify. Rabba says he can still testify. Why? Because Adam Karaveto Atmo, Vein Adam Meitzim Atmo Rasha. Rabba says the person is not believed. The person is disqualified for his own testimony about himself. And so since a person cannot make himself to be a wicked person with his own admission, he's not believed. So therefore we assume that the sexual act on him happened against his will. And so therefore we believe him we believe him about the testimony about the other person, but we don't believe him vis-a-vis himself. So we don't believe he's a disqualified witness because he's a wicked, but we do believe him about the testimony against the other person. So that's the ironic thing here. You're believed to testify about another person, but not about yourself. That's what Rava says. Why do you say that? No, the Rambam rules like him. We don't believe a person testifying about himself. A person can't incriminate himself. So therefore, he cannot incriminate himself. A person cannot make himself wicked. So we don't believe it to incriminate himself. And so even if he was involved in the act, we believe him to testify about another, but not about himself. So therefore, Rabbi is saying, since he's not believed to testify about himself, we're going to break his testimony into two parts. The first part, where he testified this other person committed the sexual act, we believe him, and so therefore he combines with the other person to put that person to punish that person. But for the other part, where he says it was with me, now we don't believe him. We call this law Palginon Dibura. This is a fundamental law, which is called, we split up his words. We break his words. We believe half of the statement and not the other half. We believe his statement as it relates to the other party, but not as it relates to himself. This is called Paginan Dibura. We'll do one more line about this. And Amarava, Ploni Baal Ishti, Uva Achar Mitzdarfin Lahargo. Avalo Laharga. Rava says similarly, he says, this man had intercourse with my wife, or on top of 10a, and therefore he committed adultery with my wife. So the husband is believed to put this man to death, but not his own wife. So, meaning to say, because he's considered to be a relative of hers. And even though we believe his testimony as it relates to the man, we don't believe it as it relates to his wife. We split up his words. So we believe him with respect to this man, but not with respect to her. Mar says, my kamash one, isn't that what we just said? It's the exact same case. Mar says, no, you might have said, Adam Karveto Atzmo, Amrinan, Etel Ishalo Amrinan, kamash one. No, we say that you say a person is not only not believed about himself, but he's also not believed also about his wife. Obviously, this is a sugya that you could spend a whole semester on in the yeshiva. A very, very powerful sugya. Okay, we'll stop here.